back to Winning Isn't Easy. So, Dr. Keller, let's talk about best practices and advice that you would give to someone who is thinking about undergoing a CPET exam. So, let's talk about what advice you would give to a person about making the decision to undergo a CPET. What should they know going in?
Great question, and I'm going to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about this because there is good, bad, and ugly. And we'll start with the ugly, and the ugly is there are not enough people who are really well versed in administering and more important, or as importantly, interpreting the 2-day cardiopulmonary exercise test in the country. We need more people to learn how to do this. And over the years, I've had individuals say, well, I can't get to Ithaca. I know we're in the middle of the state. We have a lot of wineries around here and some beautiful lakes. We're in the Finger Lakes region, but still we're 4 hours from New York City and 2 hours from Rochester and an hour from Syracuse, and we're in the middle of the state. So I can't get there, and so I talk to my local hospital and they'll do 2 CPETs for me. And so, the devil is in the details when you do these. And the reason that we do them with a stationary cycle is because it's much easier to more precisely reproduce the workload on day 1 with the workload on day 2 when you have somebody on the cycle. When you put them on a treadmill, if they grab the handlebars to steady themselves, they've automatically changed the work that they're doing. So there's much more variability when you use a treadmill. And for that reason, we use a cycle. But to get back to the issue here is, so not only doing the protocol correctly, and we have published a paper on that, but still we find people doing, 5-minute warm-ups. You can't do 5-minute warm-ups with these people. That will be the end of the test. But then what do you do with the data? And the important thing for somebody who's seeking, considering a 2-day cardiopulmonary test is they need some kind of report produced that's going to speak to their issues of not being able to, sit at a desk for more than 5 minutes at a time. And how do you go about creating that kind of report based on the CPET data? And that's where it becomes problematic, where we have very few people who are experienced and knowledgeable to be able to translate that data to activities of daily living. And so not only doing the test correctly, because I've actually sent the recipe to clinics and said, okay, please do this. And what I get afterwards, send me the data, is not what I asked them to do. Right. And so now the poor person went through the testing and it wasn't done correctly. And for that reason, we typically don't analyze data that was collected elsewhere because we didn't have any control over it. We didn't know if the lab or the clinic did biocalibration, which is really important to make sure that your measures are accurate. And then we get to the interpretation part of the thing, which is a whole other ball of wax too. So that's the ugly part of, finding somebody who can do that. And there are people who have a lot of experience doing that. And certainly the Workwell Foundation on the West Coast has been doing it for over 20 years, as have I. But it's difficult, especially if you're in the middle of the country.
Right.
So that's the ugly. The bad is, you sort of hinted to that, is how do we get you to our exercise test site, even if you're only going 45 minutes and not pre-fatigue you? And the answer to that is you don't. But Josh, if you could go to the next slide. Some of the things that I would encourage you to consider if you're thinking about doing a 2-day cardiopulmonary test is to pre-rest before you come to wherever you're going to get the test done. Depending on the amount of travel and the modes of travel, airplane, train, whatever, bus, that might mean that you pre-rest even more. So for people with fatiguing illnesses, certainly try to schedule a week before you come to us where you really don't have much high demand. And when I say demand, I mean not just physical, but I mean emotional and, very importantly, cognitive. So try to limit your cognitive stress, screen time, challenging thinking, all of that. And I'll get back to that in a second. So try to pre-rest before you come to us, because we know travel is going to alter your baseline somewhat. All right. Sometimes people, if they're able, they'll come a day early. Everybody has to come a day before the protocol. You don't want to. We don't take people who travel in the day of the protocol unless they're less than an hour away. But everybody arrives a day before. We've had some people flying from the Midwest or the West Coast a couple of days ahead just so they could just rest in the hotel room, do the protocol, and then sometimes they'll add a day or two afterwards instead of traveling right away. But know that we're going to provoke your post-exertional response. To what extent, we don't know, and that varies from one person to the next. Actually, probably better than any of us what your post-exertional response will be. So plan for that. Don't plan parties, appointments with your attorney, sorry, Nancy, or your doctors right after you finish a 2-day test. If you can, have a support person with you. If your doctor agrees that arranging for post-test IV saline infusion, sometimes a liter of IV saline really helps, because remember I said blood flow with oxygen to the muscles and the brain is impacted in everybody. So sometimes some people will find that getting a liter of IV saline after the test, even if after they get back home, is really helpful to jumpstart their recovery. That said, you would want to talk to your physician about it, because I don't know necessarily before you walk in my door if you're hypertensive, and I might not want to be putting a liter of saline in there if you are. Most of the people we test are not. And then plan your trip. So if you do have air transport, arrange with the airlines that you're not walking through that airport, and put your headphones on, put your sunglasses on, put, whatever you need to do, whatever you need to do to tamp down the stimuli, and, make sure you've got drinks. If you can go and get into, US Airways lounge area or whatever, quiet lounge area, that can be helpful too, or whatever airline you're traveling. But those are the things you'd want to do in planning a trip to come for a 2-day test.
So let me ask you this, and I get this question, these two questions a lot. Should I take my medication as normally scheduled before the CPET exam? And I am so anxious about this exam and the results and the impact it's going to have on my case. Is my anxiety going to screw up the results?
Great.
Those two questions.
Great question, and we get it all the time. So I send people back to their physician to discuss with their physician whether or not they should come off their meds. So there's two schools of thought. One is that if you're on your meds and your meds are helping you and we test you, then we're getting test results based on, your best case scenario, because you've got benefit of your meds helping you. And is that going to impact, your level of impairment that we might detect or may not detect because of the meds? So if you want the worst case scenario from your data, then you would want to talk to your physician about, should I come off all my meds? Because that's you, right? That's you unmedicated. That's your personality. That's the most organic you can get. And if you want to know, can your organic self produce enough energy to, to do what you need to do or not? Right. Then if that's what you want us to evaluate with our CPET, then you would come off your meds. For some people, they'll decide, maybe I need to stay on this one for my anxiety, but everything else I'm coming off. And I ask you to make that decision with your physician, because sometimes weaning off those meds it takes a few days, and that's something you should discuss with them. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah,
it does. And so, obvious question that we both get is how much is this going to cost, and potentially who's going to pay for it?
We provide the procedure codes, so you can check with your insurer. We don't do anything with insurance. We are bare bones, trying to provide the service as inexpensively as possible. And I can't tell you what other clinics charge because I honestly don't know. We know that 5 years ago when we tried to, survey where, what other clinics were charging, that I think out on the West Coast at Stanford, they were charging $10,000 per test.
Right.
We don't do that. Our cost right now is $3,500 for the whole protocol, including your report. So that's, on average, we spend about, from beginning to end, beginning with the initial email and email time and testing and report generation, we spend about 20 to 25 hours per person. So, and we have multiple people and expensive equipment. So $3,500 is pretty bare bones inexpensive. But the cardiopulmonary test protocol procedure number is very common. It's the same one they use, for cardiac patients and everything else. So it just depends on whether your insurer is going to give you the song and dance about in-network, out-of-network. And I always tell people, find somebody in network. You won't.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
You can go to the East Coast, you can go to the West Coast for this test protocol, but the chances of finding somebody in network is about zero. So,
right.
You can tell that to your insurer, and also remind them that you do the test twice. So the procedure code is applied twice. I would love to be able to say this insurer, reimburses at this amount, and I have no idea because we get everything from soup to nuts, and I honestly don't see it. The person we're testing is the one that deals with that.
Okay. So if someone wanted to contact you and your facility to explore undergoing a CPET exam, how would they go about doing that?
I will put a slide up here next, and with some email addresses. But Josh, if you can go one more slide, I want to just show before, go back to the last slide, please. That one, yes. I just want to hammer home one point here. These are a lot of the measurements that we get, not all of them, that we get from doing a cardiopulmonary test on the right side of this slide. And I know they're tiny, so don't strain your eyes. But what is hugely important, if you're contemplating getting a test done somewhere and they are not measuring blood pressure, please don't do your test there because they need to be measuring what we call hemodynamic response to exercise is so important for this patient population. So blood pressure before, during, and after exercise is hugely important. The last slide, Josh, if you would. So you can contact the WorkWell Foundation. They've been doing this for many, decades now at info@workwellfoundation.org. We are collaborating with them and are literally this week in the process of getting our clinic opened, our new space in Ithaca, and you can go to info@workwelleast.org and connect with us that way as well.
Neat. Well, I thank you for the time that you've taken today to put together this presentation and to be our guest. I've learned so much, and I know that the members of our audience are just going to be blown away by what you've shared with us today. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in this week. I hope that you found this episode helpful. I certainly did. Please take a moment to like our page, leave a review, share it with your family or friends, and please subscribe to the podcast. Join us next week for another insightful discussion and episode of Winning Isn't Easy. Thanks for listening.
And thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.